Alice Emma Traynor was born on September 23, 1863, in Goderich, Ontario, Canada. Goderich was a town of about 4,000 people, located at the mouth of the Maitland River on Lake Huron, that boasted of being the prettiest town in Canada. Alice's parents, Bernard Traynor and Louisa Saunders, had emigrated from Britain to Ontario in the late 1840s. Alice was their seventh child, and one of 8 who survived to adulthood. While we do not have much information about Alice's early years, we do know that the Traynor family were members of the Wesleyan Methodist Church, and Alice was baptized at the age of 4. Her father was Huron County's High Constable, which would have given the family a certain degree of social status, if not a lot of money. Alice attended the Central School in Goderich, where her oldest sister, Matilda, was a teacher. When Alice was 6 years old, her mother died in childbirth, leaving Matilda to take on the additional responsibilities of running the household and helping to raise her siblings. By the time Alice was in her late teens, her father had also died, and 2 of her brothers had moved to Chicago in search of job opportunities. In 1887, Alice and her 3 sisters, Matilda, Bertha, and Louise, decided to join the boys in Chicago. Chicago in the late 1880s was the fastest growing city in the United States. The 1890 census would show a total population of just over 1 million, with more arriving every day. The city had made an almost miraculously rapid recovery from the disastrous Great Fire of 1871 and was beginning to plan for the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893. While Chicago had a reputation for focusing on commerce above all else, city leaders were also establishing cultural institutions, such as the Art Institute, the Chicago Symphony, and the University of Chicago. But Chicago was also a city of extreme divides between the rich and poor, and home to a vibrant and occasionally violent labor movement. 1893 was a momentous year for Chicago, and it was too for Alice, for this was when she met her future husband, William H. Miner. Born in Wisconsin in 1862, William came to Chazy after being orphaned at the age of 10. For the next 8 years, he lived on the Miner family farm with his Uncle John and Aunt Huldah. Will returned to the Midwest in his late teens and began working in the railroad business, developing the skills in drafting and engineering that he used to design and build railroad cars and their components. In 1890, he came to Chicago and began working as a mechanical superintendent for the California Fruit Transportation Company, a pioneer in the long-distance transportation of fresh produce in refrigerated railroad cars. Will traveled frequently on business, and the surviving letters he wrote to Alice during his absences give us a peek into the early years of their relationship. During the summer of 1893, Will seemed equally enthralled by the World's Fair and by Alice. Will and Alice explored the fair together with her sisters and with visiting friends, on foot and on bicycles. The fair's exhibits provided endless inspiration, as well as a vision of the future in which technology, commerce, and art would join together to create the ideal City Beautiful. While working for California Fruit, Will was also perfecting what would become his first patented piece of railroad gear, the tandem draft rigging. He made his first sale in 1894 and began building up his own business even in the midst of a severe economic depression. With their financial security seemingly assured, Alice and William were married on June 10, 1895. They continued to live with Alice's 3 sisters in the Kenwood neighborhood on Chicago's South Side. During this period, Alice began keeping scrapbooks of articles clipped from newspapers and popular magazines, which give us a glimpse into her developing interests in art, music, literature, and architecture. She sometimes joined William on his business travels and enjoyed exploring the United States. Back home in Chicago, she took guitar lessons and formed a mandolin club with a group of like-minded friends. William's interest in photography and their household of lively pets provided much fodder for amusement. In March 1902, after almost 7 years of marriage, Alice gave birth to a long-awaited child, William Henry Minor Jr. But sadly, William Jr. died when he was only 10 days old. Alice, now in her late 30s, probably knew that having another child was unlikely, and this tragic event may have led Alice and William to turn their attention to Chazy. William had inherited the family farm when his uncle John Minor died in 1895, though he does not seem to have considered living there until some 8 years later. But having made the decision, in characteristic fashion, he plunged into the business, rapidly expanding and modernizing the old farm. In addition to the new farm buildings that were constructed, work began on their country home, known as Heart's Delight Cottage. While Will managed the overall project, the furnishing and decorating of the home would primarily have been Alice's responsibility. Over the next decade, as Heart's Delight Farm grew and became more of a showplace, more and more guests came to visit and enjoy a taste of idealized country life. Walks in the woods, boating, horseback riding, and archery were just a few of the pleasures afforded by Heart's Delight, along with delicious meals, a well-stocked library, and games of cards. Alice's career as a collector also seems to have begun in Chazy. According to one story, her friends in Chicago were worried that she would be bored in the country and encouraged her to find a hobby. It is true that Alice's friend Emma Hodge was an experienced and knowledgeable collector of ceramics, and she provided encouragement and advice. China collecting was a popular pastime among middle and upper-class American women at the turn of the century, and rural areas were fruitful grounds for china hunts. Alice and her fellow collectors were especially interested in the blue and white transferware and other ceramics that were commonly found in American homes in the early 19th century. They associated these pieces with the gentility and refinement of pre-industrial America and saw them as symbols of the importance of domestic life and women's role in the household. While china collecting was evidently a passing phase for some women, for Alice it led to a lifelong interest in early American material culture and a deeper engagement in what came to be known as the Colonial Revival movement, an interest in documenting, preserving, and in some cases recreating the places and things associated with the founding era of the United States. In 1916, William and Alice purchased an early 19th century structure in Chazy Village and began developing plans to turn it into a museum. Alice worked with architect Frederick B. Townsend, who had also designed the Chazy Central Rural School and many of the structures at Heart's Delight Farm. Plans for the building went through several stages, evolving from a conventional museum with galleries and display cases to the period rooms of the colonial home as it was ultimately built. Construction on the museum began in March 1924 and was largely completed by the end of 1925, although the decorating and furnishing of the rooms would continue to evolve for several more years. Alice purchased the museum's carpets, wallpaper, and light fixtures from her favorite Chicago department store, Marshall Field. The rest of the pieces in each room came from a range of sources: antique dealers in New England, New York, and Chicago, friends and fellow collectors, and individuals throughout Clinton County who generously donated family heirlooms. Like many collectors and museum curators during this period, Alice Minor was motivated both by a love of the past and concerns about the present and future. She had a particular vision of what colonial America had been like, a primarily agrarian society of independent farmers, craftspeople, and merchants, most of whom were of British descent, Protestant, and English-speaking. But what Alice saw in Chicago at the turn of the century was happening all over the United States, if on a smaller scale. The country was rapidly industrializing, urbanization was well underway, and a massive influx of immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe was changing the face of the nation. How could the United States continue to maintain its democratic traditions under such changed conditions? The colonial revival was one way of addressing this problem. Its proponents valued early American material culture for its historic and artistic value, but they also saw it as a valuable teaching tool. If Americans could see for themselves the places in which the founders of our nation had lived, perhaps these great men would seem more human and spark an interest in the past, which in turn would promote patriotism and civic engagement. Moreover, 20th century collectors were great believers in the power of environment to shape behavior. They felt that by recreating physical settings of early America, they could revive the values associated with that period, thereby counteracting the forces of change that threatened to undermine social and political stability. Today we have a broader view of our nation's past and a more inclusive vision of what it means to be an American. But Alice's collection still has much to teach us. From settees to samplers, the objects she chose have stories to tell about the times in which they were made. But they also tell us as much about Alice herself.